Well, it's great to be with Chris Saxman and with someone who is does Facebook Live all the time, and we appreciate that you're being on This Week in Virginia. Um, for the few people out there in the world who don't know Chris Saxman, I first met him when he was a member of the House of Delegates, serving in 2002, 2010. In fact, Chris, if I'm thinking correctly, and I hope I am, I can see where your office was in the old GAB. That if I look out the window, it's no longer there, and I can see the coffee maker that you had, and the only one that was available among all 140 legislators, where any person coming by, even if they didn't know who is that delegate from Stanton area, there would be a chance to get a cup of coffee. And I tell you, that said a great deal about you then and about who you are now. After that decade in the House of Delegates, you decided that you wanted to do something that else, and it's delightful that as you explained it to your kids at the time, that you were a person who connected the dots, that you were a dot connector, and I think that that's certainly has been the case. We're going to talk a little bit about Virginia Free, certainly again, but Angel Minor, our co-host on This Week in Virginia, was particularly interested and intrigued about Virginia Free. I was telling her it started back in 1998, but
88.
she was 88, 1988, a decade earlier. And she was very interested in asking you something about Virginia Free. So, Angel,
Thank you. I'm really interested in what sparked your interest in a leadership position for Virginia Free, and can you also explain a little bit about what Virginia Free is?
Well, let's do the reverse. I'll take the second question first and then answer the first one. Virginia Free was founded in 1988 by business leaders in the Commonwealth who were concerned about politics, who were concerned about some policy directions. Some of the members in the legislature that were coming up in the ranks and seniority had some very anti-business views and sentiments, and they realized that they need to be better equipped from an educational standpoint about candidates, legislators, incumbents, and what was going on in both political parties, and they wanted to become more engaged. And they felt the best way to do that was to aggregate their resources and put together an organization, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, which we are proudly, boldly, fiercely nonpartisan, which is a great lane for me personally, not to take sides on every single issue just because you're in a particular political party. So that's what they did. They got together and they started, evaluating candidates who they would support financially. And at the time, these were big business leaders whose contributions were significant in campaigns. And now, with the national wave of money and the national political narrative, it's more difficult to punch through all that and to have a Virginia business focus. And so our task is pretty tall these days. Why I decided to do it was because I came from the business world. As David alluded to about having the coffee clatch outside of my office in the GAB, it was because that was our business. And it was a heck of a lot easier for me to meet people if they're already at my door. So it was a function of my laziness, essentially. Now, I was being generous, obviously, but if you put a coffee machine out front, and like it's one of those Keurig machines, and Keurig was brand new at the time, so it was a great novelty item, and people would stop by and go, "Oh, what's this?" And they get their own cup of coffee, But we'd stop by, and they'd come in with a cup of coffee in their hand, or in the afternoon they'd get a cup of coffee, and we'd have some of my wife's homemade chocolate chip cookies, and we'd just sit down and talk. And that's really what politics is. It's sitting down and sharing opinions and views and philosophies and these kinds of things and opportunities and dreams. And I really enjoyed that part of it. And David said I got out to go do other things. Well, the primary thing was not to get divorced. And I don't say that laughingly, because we did separate and then get back together and reconcile, which is an amazing process unto itself. But politics is difficult, and the more we know about each other and the more we know about our world, we can get along and get things done. And that's really what drove me to get in politics in the first place, was to get things done and to not take such a partisan lens on things, because I came in at a time that bipartisanship was, as you remember, David, was the calling card. You had to be more bipartisan than the other person. Which, if you can imagine that time.
Right.
So, Angel, this probably predates your birth, literally. you know, because I was elected just 2 months after 9/11, not even 2 months after 9/11, and the entire country was focused on unity and bipartisanship and working together. And you literally you had to show more bipartisanship than your Democratic opponent or your Republican opponent. Said, no, I'm more bipartisan than the other guy. Oh no, that's who I am. And now it's like, good Lord, we're so far removed from that. But it's been a generation. So yeah, that's Virginia Free's. That's what we do. It's what we try to do. And you know, we have a unique role to play that no other state really has. This role being played by a business organization. So we don't, and we differentiate between the chambers of commerce, which do a great job on policy. That's not our lane. Our lane is politics. And if you know political campaigns well enough, and all I'm sure David does, you've got a policy shop and a political shop, and we're the political shop for the business community. And it's a unique lane, and I really enjoy it. Having been a former teacher, it allows me to teach more about politics to business people who don't know much about politics, and conversely, to the political world from what's going on in business, and try to relay that to them, because I come from a business perspective as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you go on the Virginia Free site, which Angel's been on there and I've been on there, you'll see the link to the blueprint, and you say, oh, you click on that, and it's the chamber. So you can see the interface and the connection, the two, as you were explaining. Chris, go back to the early 2000s and the bipartisanship, and then reflect on today. Why is it so different? As teacher, coach, what what has made it almost 100% different?
Yeah, it's well, I'm going to hold this up, right? It's the internet, the cell phone,
Yeah.
the immediate connectedness. You had a more robust press corps at the time that was more, you know, nonpartisan. I think the media has been segmented and segregated into its own, you know, audiences, and they cater to them. I mean, the media is, you know, predominantly liberal left. It's not left leaning anymore, because that's their audience. That's who reads their papers. I get it. It's marketing. It's business 101. You cater to your audience, and so that's accelerated it. And plus the nationalization of all the, and that's in the growth of cable news as the dominant player in both political parties' nomination processes. I mean, Ron DeSantis won the governorship of Florida by just going on Fox News every night. I mean, think about that. And who's he catering to in the primary in Florida? And once you get on the ballot, there's one of two choices, and the other choice becomes so unappealing due to negative partisanship. And that's what's driven us apart. We identify ourselves so quickly and so intensely in one political party or the other, and it's fractured friendships, it's fractured marriages, it's fractured neighborhoods, schools. I mean, our institutions, our civic institutions are breaking apart because we have been so divided on a strictly a bipartisan level. It's either or. It's an A/B test every single day, and that's what Donald Trump. That's how he won the nomination in 2016. He went down the line and said, me or Jeb Bush, boom. Me or, you know, low energy Jeb. Me or little Marco, boom. Me or Ted, you know, me or Carly. He went right down the list. He made it everything an A/B test. Brilliant politics, but it is reflective of our political reality in America, where it's, you know, it's either or, and it's comes down to good or evil, you know, us or them, and it's fractured, it's dangerous. And our adversaries around the world are loving it. China, Russia, Iran in particular, love how divided we are internally. And we're even worse than that. We're subdivided. If you look at America and how our politics is so suburbanized, we live in subdivisions. And that has broken down our communities and our institutions. And it's very dangerous for the long-term health of our country and the world because of our particular role in it.
You know, I'm interested that you didn't mention gerrymandering at all as one of the factors, and there are some that would almost claim that that is the big cause. But my perspective has been there's been gerrymandering from the beginning practically, and even there was gerrymandering back when you were in the House of Delegates, and yet there was a bipartisanship spirit that was there. So I think you put your finger on the more the real causes. You know, one of the things that people have found if they start going over your different websites and find out that you've got something, it's the 11 campaign rules. And I found those very refreshing and very interesting. And there was one of them that jumped out at me that I wanted to read back to you. and have you reflect in 2021 about this. It's number 7 on the list. Relationships matter. And you say build them. Start with being nice. That was the coffee. That was not very nice, Chris. Thank you. And then you said one of the candidates for governor, again, remembering this is going back some time ago, one of the candidates for governor, Democrat Terry McAuliffe, called me on my birthday, and this year and last year. Last year, he said he called from Spain. It was the first time I'd ever spoken to the man. That speaks volume about the campaign. He was just being nice, and being nice goes a long way in the world. Now, Chris, we're in the midst of a, nominating process among Republicans, where the battle's going on among Democrats leading up to the primary in June. And being nice, is that still one of the campaign rules? Of course, you said the campaign rule was not be nice. The campaign rule was relationships matter. And then, but you say that starts with being nice. Is that, would you rewrite that one now, or do you stand by that one?
I absolutely stand by that. Relationships absolutely matter in this business, far more important than the current campaign. And in Virginia, we recognize that every year, don't we? We have a significant consequential campaign every year. And I'll just backtrack a little bit to gerrymandering and why I don't think it contributes, but it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with how the internet and how social media, just overwhelms that whole notion of where districts are. Because in the end, Senate districts aren't gerrymandered. And that is becoming just as divided and partisan as ever. I mean, they're thinking about taking out the filibuster, which in my estimation will be one of the first final steps in the republic. And I don't say that with any joy or any overstatement. I fundamentally believe if we get rid of the filibuster, we're in deep doo-doo as a country in a republic, because that's one of the great breaks and clutches on our what's the term I want to use here, on our mob rule mentality that we have right now in a populist era. And if you go back to the progressive populist era of Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson back in those days, I mean, there was so much change during the Wilson administration that it's tough to recognize just the amount of change that's occurred in the last year. Culturally, socially, and it will be borne out politically as well. So when we look at being nice and building relationships, that is essential more than ever to not only good governance, but good electioneering. I mean, people are sick and tired of all the negativity, and yet negativity is what drives us to the polls to vote a particular way. And I think there's a time and a place for that in politics, especially in the early phases of the campaign. I'm reading the book about Joe Biden, called Lucky. I think by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes right now. I read that on my trip last week, pretty well through it. I mean, they're at each other's throats, but at the end of the day, they're going to have to get along because the choice is binary. And that's the strategy. That's the element in both political campaigns. We can say anything we want to our compatriots in our own party, but at the end of the day, we're going to give the nation a choice, or our state or our district or whatever, a choice between, us versus them, and good versus evil. And that's what it's going to boil down to. So you have to get in line behind the person who just was almost criminally horrible to you. And I think it's time for someone or some organization to call Bravo Sierra on the whole thing. Because the binary path of politics in America today is not sustainable. You probably remember that from the early 2000s as well. But it was fiscal sustainability. I remember Mark Warner talking about that. Well, that's been blown out the window, right? With all the trillions of dollars we've added up, it's going to be over $30 trillion by the end of next year. It looks like, with the new $3 trillion package being proposed. But by and large, relationships are absolutely essential. To be able to pick up a phone and say, "Hey, this is what we need to do," and have it mean something. But politics is overwhelming that, and so I think it's more important and more essential to good campaigning to build relationships, so you can network in those organizations and have someone validate you as a good person or a good candidate for their vote. Yeah.
Angel, jump back in. I think you got another question.
Okay. You back in 2007, 2008, you worked as a co-chairman
Okay.
So did John McCain?
I when people bring back history from, I'm like, oh, wait a second.
Can you speak a little bit on your experience on that?
Oh, the McCain campaign, that was a rocket ride. He called me on, John McCain called me from Iowa on election night here in Virginia, and the Virginia Republicans had just gotten shellacked. It was, you know, they had these victory party celebrations, but it wasn't much of a victory that night. And he said, you want to help me out in Virginia to co-chair along with U.S. Senator John Warner. And at the time, I was to be the young conservative, you know, rising star in the Republican Party to balance out John Warner. Now, as a result of that association, I'm a rhino and a not conservative anymore, because I was the conservative, you know, balance out for John Warner. It's so funny how this thing ebbs and flows in politics. But, you know, being on a national campaign and going to the rallies, because Virginia was a competitive state then, and warming up the crowd for Sarah Palin and John McCain several times, and flying around the plane with John McCain and his family, you know, it was a heady time. I got to give the motion to adjourn at the Republican National Convention in 2008. You get to meet people you never would have met before, actors and famous people that you, after a while, you're no longer starstruck. You're like, you know, stand next to Robert Duvall in a handshake line. Hey, so how are you? You know, what do you talk about with Robert Duvall, right? I mean, one of my favorites was John McCain's mother, Roberta, who just recently passed away at the age of, like, I think she was 108, 107. Roberta, she was a fascinating figure. But yeah, to be in the, you know, to communicate with the leading people on the policy lines was, you know, there was great. I mean, you know, it's just, I mean, from a former teacher from the Shenandoah Valley, you know, that was heady stuff, and I really enjoyed it. And it got me an insight into national politics and how difficult it is to run a campaign, because after the nomination was sewn up here in Virginia, I think in February, you saw the absolute dumpster fire that campaign was for the next 3 or 4 months. I mean, it was just, it was awful how everyone was glomming on to this, and you saw that reality. So that has informed, you know, me and how to help businesses and clients throughout the years about, you know, how the timing and calendar and the national dynamics work and for or against you. And that was a wonderful experience, and I wouldn't have traded that for anything. That was neat, and it sort of culminated 2.5 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago. I'm in London at Harrods. It's during Christmas season, November, cold outside, and I had my McCain fleece on from the campaign. The actual, you know, there was the difference between the ones you buy online and the ones the campaign people had. And the ones the campaign people had, you know, a little bit more cachet. So I'm standing there at Harrods in this really cool kiosk there. They had this white powder you'd pour water on, it'd fluff up like snow, and it was cold and wet, but it wasn't wet. It was really weird. And I turned and I go, wow, would you believe this? And I turn and it's Meghan McCain, you know, in Harrods in London. And she had a hat on. She's short, and I wasn't expecting this. I'm like, Meghan? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, right here, McCain. And she was in town picking up an award for her father. And it's one of those connecting points that I love about politics, is that when you put it all aside, it's a good thing, and we need to remember that.
You already touched on it a little bit before we started recording, but you had so many different careers in your past, as being a teacher, a businessman, Congress. What are some of your most rewarding attributes that you gained from your careers?
The relationships, looking back on, you know, with my students, with people in our trade. I was chairman of our International Trade Association. At the same time, I was chairman of the McCain campaign. You know, it's the people, it's the stories, it's what connects us, it's what binds us as human beings to one another. I've had a multi-varied career. I didn't go like, I'm going to be an accountant, and for the next 30, 40 years, I'm going to be an accountant. And that's who I was in college as well. It's who I was growing up. I'd play any sport, hang out with anyone. You know, didn't matter who they were or where they were from, or socioeconomics or demographics. It's just like, you know, I sort of the neighborhood I grew up in, suburban Detroit. We didn't even have a plurality in that neighborhood. You know, everyone was different, but yet we were all so connected and just having fun as kids. And I always treasured that. And I guess it's just who I am. I mean, bartended, bounced, cut lawns, washed trucks, delivered newspapers. Gosh, I could probably name off a lot more, probably to my wife's displeasure. But from a lack of focus, there's always been one focus, and that's connecting people and I think learning from one another. And that's what I treasure about politics too, because it's a great opportunity to make things better for our fellow man and learn more about life in this world. And that's I think the thread.
Chris, we're past the middle of March. May, Republicans pick their candidates for statewide office. Interesting process that's going to be taking place. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but in the strict of bipartisanship, I'll throw in the Democratic primary, in which I have never seen in my limited time on planet Earth as many candidates for lieutenant governor in one party, where it will be decided by a primary, where the winner could very well win with 30% of the vote.
Win with 20.
Yeah, with 20.
Seriously.
Could certainly. And the number of candidates for seeking the governorship in both parties, but different processes being used.
Right.
Going back first to the Republican one, I'd like to get your comments on both of them. So if someone becomes a delegate, drives to one of those 30-some places, gets to cast their vote, do they then wait to cast a vote in another round, or is it the ranked choice voting, or what is going to be the process that will narrow the field down? Because I do believe that the winner in that selection process will have to get a majority, right?
Right, and that's determined by ranked choice voting. So the Republicans on May 8th, it's probably the only thing the Republicans have done well this campaign season was pick May 8th and stick to it as their date. It's literally giving them a month head start on Democrats for the statewide campaigns. I can't underscore how important that is, because Republicans have, not concerned themselves with as much the calendar as the Democrats have, who get out their vote and do the early voting. And that has been one of the keys in their organizational strength in registering voters and getting to the polls and getting their ballots cast. And Republicans go, we'll just show up on election day. I'm like, guys, people can vote whenever they want to now these days, it seems. So I give them credit for sticking with May 8th from a tactical standpoint, a strategic standpoint. Those are important elements in the campaign for them to win, or try to win anyway. At least they're trying to win. The ranked choice voting in the unassembled conventions, you do have to go to your local committee meetings, sign up, put your, sign up in their delegate form. You can still drive to an unassembled convention and I think be de-credentialed by the credentials committee if you voted in a Democratic primary or you supported the Democratic candidate over the years or whatever. So they always have their.
I think you said Democratic. You mean supported a Republican candidate, right?
No. If you voted this is what the Republicans will do. If you voted in the last Democratic primary, let's say you voted in 2020 Democratic primary, they'll contest your Republicanness, your purity, and right. They could bounce you from the convention. I think that depends upon the rules they come up with. And this is the only state that does this in the United States for the Republican Party. It's not going to be as bad as the Iowa caucuses were for the Democrats in 2020, if you remember that debacle.
Yes.
And I actually had forgotten about it until I was reading the book, the Biden book, over the weekend. But it'll be ranked choice, which is, again, one of the smarter things they've done in the convention versus doing multiple ballots, which would have been god awful for everyone sitting in their cars on May 8th, hopefully it would have decent weather and there would be, food and facilities available at each of these 37 locations. So, at least they figured that they can make it easier. And, I've not been not unkind to the Republican Party leadership about this. I mean, I think it's just completely abhorrent that what they're doing with this with the convention. They need to go and follow the Democrats on this one. And of course, because the Democrats do it, Republicans can't. That whole line, which is just moronic. The Democrats, having a primary, but they've got their own problems. I mean, you saw Sean Perriman send out a robo text, I think yesterday, saying that he was the only African-American running in the race. And then Hala Ayala said, well, no, you don't, because I'm Afro-Latina. And then people chimed in, so what about Xavier Warren? So, people are making mistakes in the primary format too for Democrats in the identity politics driven world that they really run on these days. The Republicans haven't really come up with too many ideas. Kirk Cox has some ideas and issues on his campaign, which are solid. Pete Snyder and Glenn Youngkin don't. They're the top three in the Republican field. So it's starting to come together now that the bio's out there and people are getting their name IDs up and doing their polling and their data analytics and getting their messages out and those kinds of things. But, by and large, it is what it is. Most people don't pay attention to it. Frankly, if you asked 100 people on the street, they'd be like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. You maybe get 10, 15, but the narrative is out there early on that Republicans really haven't gotten their act together yet as an organization. And it's fair. It's fair. It's completely fair.
You mentioned that it hopes good weather and there would be food and drink available there. If I jump several states and go down to Georgia for just a moment, then I want to get back to Virginia. I don't want to stay in Georgia. I'm intrigued that among the many bills that are introduced and being debated in Georgia is one that would make it a misdemeanor to give someone food or water while they're standing in line to get into the polling place. I hope that bill is one of the ones that dies. Personally, I think it's ridiculous. I can't imagine that giving someone water or some food standing in line is going to influence how they're going to vote when they get in the polling place. But if they're in that line a long time, but the absurdity for someone who would give out coffee to lobbyists and other people who would come by, the thought that there would be an effort to say you can't give any refreshments to people who are standing in line. Where does someone come up with such ideas as that?
You and I've been around long enough to know how many stupid bills are put in, and that's certainly one of them. Not being able to give food and comfort. In my nominating, we had a mass meeting out in Buffalo Gap at Buffalo Gap High School. It was blazing. It was like 100 degrees that day. Ooh. And it doesn't get 100 degrees in the Shenandoah Valley. It gets in the heat. It's uncomfortable. This is like upper 90s. It was awful. And I said to my team, we're having food and we're having beverages out there. And we had a bottle of water coming. So we could come up with a lot of bottled water. And we're going to ice these things down because I'm not having people out here and just suffer. Win or lose, you got to take care of your people. Nothing hit home to me more than traveling through Hartsfield Atlanta Airport, talking about Georgia. They shut down food service in the terminal at dinner time. You had hundreds of people getting off South and West planes where you basically get kibble in bits and you get off the plane. There's no restaurants open. It was a disaster. It's almost inhumane not to take care of people or offer care in those kind of conditions under the guise of voting. I think it's completely legitimate to have, for mornings on election day to have coffee and donuts available. Why wouldn't you? David, you know me. If I had to do it over again, I'd have a kegerator in my office.
Yeah, right.
To have people come by, have a beer after work and just hammer it out, right? I think there's nothing more political than food, and there's nothing more binding than food. In beverage and getting people together just to have it. This weekend I was down in South Louisiana. We had a crawfish, crab, and shrimp boil. Just to sit across the table from people and figure out who they are and what they're doing. I think it's essential to be just being human. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really dumb bill.
Yes, yes.
Sum it up. Because here's how this is talk about the history teacher in me. 1757, George Washington runs for the House of Burgesses. He is the most popular person in America. He's the most popular person in Virginia. He's the most well-known colonialist in Europe. He's that popular because he wrote about his adventures on the frontier up around Fort Duquesne, Pittsburgh now in the French and Indian War, right? The kid's 23. You put it in perspective. He's not that old. But because of his writings, he became this popular figure in America. He runs for the House of Burgesses and gets clobbered. He is the most popular person literally in America, and he finishes third in a three-way race with 14.5% of the vote because he got wrapped around a zoning issue. Okay. Next year he comes back, and what's he do? He serves up a bunch of whiskey and beer and food, and that guy got married, and that guy wins. I mean, it's not rocket science.
Right.
Sorry, there's a rant. There was a rant.
Chris, I could talk with you as long as you would permit, but I know that the time will be precious and you'll get on to something else. But before we would end, I'd really love to hear you take a look at where we are right now in the Commonwealth and look across the landscape toward November and share some of your perspectives on what are the big issues. Let's I'm making an assumption that in the campaign for statewide there will be issues, uh, and that's probably will hold true. What what will be those issues that will drive voters who are in this Commonwealth when we don't register by party? For those who tend to swing back and forth, either who vote or don't vote, or who make their choices, who are not dyed in the wool Democrats or Republicans, what what are the issues that you see and that will shape the politics before people can get to do the policy?
Yeah. Well, I think the national narrative is what drives Virginia politics now more so than ever. Since 2005, more money comes into the Commonwealth for gubernatorial campaigns than is generated from within the Commonwealth. So a lot of the candidates right now are following and chasing that national money, be it in small dollar donations or whatever, all those interest groups that never were around before that are, put up by these, phantom organizations that they've got these, great gauzy names like, oh, we're the people of whatever, and they try to get their endorsements. They don't have anyone behind it, but it's a funding source or an organizational force or a media source. But at the end of the day, it always is going to come down to probably crime, taxes, education in Virginia. Transportation is pretty well off the board. Healthcare to a degree, if it depends on what the Biden administration does in that area. But we saw over last summer, the volatility, not just in the culture that was going on, but the reaction to it, and how like the defunding the police narrative was devastating for Democrats. I mean, in a year you win the presidency by 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, you lost 14 seats in the House of Representatives. And Republicans have started to crack the code when it comes to demographics. They were very successful in suburban swing districts with female candidates and people of color all across the board. And it was Asian, Hispanic, African American, and they're diversifying their candidate portfolio. And with Donald Trump picking up 10% of Hispanic votes and picking up, I think, 4 or 5% on African American votes, the Democrats have a real problem long term in their coalition development, and they're starting to realize it, and they're starting to freak out about it. And you're going to see that response. You're going to see a very targeted effort by the Democrats to rebuild that coalition post-Trump. Great article in the Intelligencer focused with David Shore, who does polling. He's on the left, and he points it out demographically that the Democrats made a critical mistake long term when they went and built a coalition founded on certain percentage turnout for African Americans, Latinos, and that's going to be difficult to maintain that coalition and not alienate other segments of our society, predominantly educated whites and non-educated whites, or undereducated whites. When you so brand yourself to identity politics, that door swings both ways, and that goes back to the question you asked about relationships. At the end of the day, how you build your relationships and what really matters in policy. And people, as David Shore points out in the Intelligencer, African Americans and Hispanic Americans are far more conservative than the Democrats are going. And Trump tapped into that. But were it not for his poor handling of the pandemic, he probably wins the election going away. And I think the Democrats understand it. So do Republicans. But crime, if it pops up again in the summer as we come out of this pandemic, I think it will. That we saw in Atlanta tragically last night in Boulder, and even Colonial Heights. You had three gunmen going after each other. Apparently, that over 100 rounds were shot. I mean, these people are going to start bumping into each other again once they come out of their homes and in their basements, if you will, culturally, and it's very different. Taxes, someone's got to pay for this stuff. Local taxes will be going up. You can't pump out $5 trillion in spending and not say we're going to have to raise taxes to pay for it eventually. Education, I think, is a real opportunity for Republicans right now because of the poor handling of K through 12 education, higher education. People are frustrated, and I think you'll see that tapped into. Right now, is what's happening is you're building narratives. And narratives come together and people are fundamentally aware of what's going on, and it's shaping their opinions, and how they're going to go forward with those opinions is absolutely critical. And that's why I think you saw a lot of the riots shut down at the end of the summer and early fall, because it was having a devastating impact on the internal polls for Democrats. And I think that the organizers said, we're not going to lose to Trump over this. And they got out just in time. So events, as Harold Macmillan, former Prime Minister of England, said back in the mid-1960s, it's, events drive campaigns. And since the calendar has been expanded so much, the voting starts in the middle of September. So you come out of the summer, and you've got very little time between, end of vacations, which everyone's going to be going on this year. They're going to get out of they're going to get out of their holes and go get out and get some sun and travel a little bit. And so, right. So the campaign, how do you get to people and they're paying attention? So, if turnout is around 40%, 43%, Republicans have a damn good chance of not only winning the governorship top 3 races, but also the House of Delegates back. You get up in the upper 40s and the Democrats probably win, but events and issues are still going to drive this thing, and especially in suburban districts. That's where the money is.
Well, we're going to have a conversation again as we move across the time frame, and encourage people to follow your work in Virginia Free.
Thank you.
And the work of Virginia Free, and to follow you on your Facebook Live. It was a great show you had when you had some of the candidates on for the Republicans seeking the nomination for governor.
Yeah, we have some more coming up, like Glenn Davis this week. Yeah, got some good ones.
Good. We look forward to those, and thank you so much for being on This Week in Virginia, and thank you for moving us into Facebook Live as well as on YouTube. So we thank you very much, and you have a good day. And Chris, I think you could filibuster the old way, and I for one would put in a plug to say, whatever they do in Washington, I think they ought to return the filibuster for what it really should be. Spend your time on the floor, speak, not to have your staff send a note or an email to someone and to say, I object. And
exactly right.
Speaking of laziness,
absolutely, it's disgusting.
You're going to filibuster.
If you want to hold the floor, hold the floor.
That's right.
This is American democracy. We're here to debate the issues. If you got a problem, get up and say it.
Yes.
What are you telling your kids? Send in a note. Oh, sorry, I can't come up and talk right now. I have to go to a fundraiser now. Are you kidding me? Get up there and talk.
Yes. That would be some great theater, and it would be really doing what they need to do. I mean, come on. So, keep the filibuster if you're going to keep it, but make it a filibuster, not just yes. Okay, thank you.
Give me Jefferson Smith on the floor, holding it for 24 hours. Give me that passion. I mean, if it means that much to you, stand up for it.
Yes.
Right, Angel?
Yeah.
See?
It's unanimous. Okay.
Well, David, thank you for what you do at This Week in Virginia. You've done it for years, and you help keep Virginians informed. And I really can't tell you how much it's an honor to be on your show, and how great it is what you've done for the Commonwealth over the years. And just want to tip if I could reach back here and grab one of my hats, I'd tip it to you, sir, for what you've done throughout the years.
Thank you, sir.